excited to be on this episode of the podcast with you. I am so happy that we're having this conversation. It's lovely to see you. Oh my
Ah,
goodness, you look ravishing in pink.
ah, say it again, Toyin. Say it again.
Don't you just love it?
Thank you, and it's great to be on the podcast. Thanks again to you and all your listeners. Just a privilege to be here.
Love it, love it. This week, Gwen, we're going to be talking about expectations. Takes me down memory lanes, A couple of months before coming to the UK, just the thought of moving over, what will I be doing for a job? What does the job market look like for me? And I know that you and I had our expectations. So I'll let you go first because you have a way of saying this that I think a lot of people will connect to coming from South Africa, coming from that really high profile HR role in South Africa, and me coming from Nigeria and that high profile HR role. What were our expectations before coming into the UK? Go for it.
So, thank you, Toyin. I think in the last podcast, I had said to the listeners that I had expected that red carpet at the airport and, employers saying, join me, Gwen, So, my expectations coming to the UK were completely misaligned. I absolutely, the first year probably was the toughest from an expectation point of view in terms of career, people, culture, the health system, the language. And I just don't think, including lots of other things,
Hmm.
but I just don't think that when you actually move to another country or culture, that you actually take the time where you are to just say, what could that look like? You know, friendships, relationships that you're leaving behind,
Yeah.
the weather, everything. So, I kind of came into the UK quite blind if I reflect back.
Hmm.
And I think that there's definitely things that we can share with the listeners of, if you are looking at that big move, what are some of the call outs that you actually should just sit down with a cup of tea and say, okay, consciously I'm moving.
Yeah.
These are the things I want to list down, or whatever that looks like, because we don't do that because we're so wrapped up in the exit of what we're trying to wrap up that we're not.
Yeah.
I didn't prepare for what the future. I just thought that I would wake up one day in the UK and life would go on the same.
Yeah.
Well, was I surprised, Toyin. So I think we can unpack that a little bit. What was your experience? Just expectations coming over?
It was it was like you, Gwen. I just reflecting back now, I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. Considering the fact that coming over to the UK was not a temporary move. It was a move that was permanent in the sense that the whole family was coming. And from a professional point of view, I was coming over as country head of human resources. Um, my role had given me jurisdiction over projects across Africa. I had led projects in Kenya. I had led projects in Zambia. I was looking at going into Tunisia as well. But I I sort of just thought that that was going to carry on. There was no logical time where I sat down and I thought, you know what, I'm coming over to the UK. What is this going to look like? Obviously, there were some conversations around doing my role remotely, but then it was a really high touch role. And it wasn't a role that could be done remotely for a long term. So it wasn't a reasonable expectations. And that was very quickly discussed and clarified from me to them and then from them to me. But I just thought that I was going to get, a job at the same competitive level of span of control of span of responsibility, and that was just where I was. Maybe what further compounded it was that I was interviewing for a role that, looking at the UK standard, coming now into the UK standard, was a senior level role. And I was being interviewed from Nigeria. it wasn't even a case of me looking for. It was I was approached on LinkedIn by the headhunter who wanted to have a conversation with me if I was interested in this role, and that conversation was going well. I was at second stage of the interviews. It was looking very well. So I wasn't even thinking of what if this thing work out? Do I need to prep? Do I need to start looking at what does it look like to be in the HR space in the UK? Because I had this in the bag. Oh dear me. I thought I had this in the bag. So it was quite shocking when, but then again, in hindsight, I wouldn't say it's out of the room shocking in the sense that I didn't get that role. One of the reasons why I didn't get that role was that I didn't have the UK experience, and but it was odd because this particular business needed me to oversee countries in Africa. So it was, but then again, I wasn't going to probe too deeply. And I was just like, you know what, we'll come in and settle the family because here I was coming into the UK with my family. So we'll come in and settle the family and then we'll see how that goes. That was a missed opportunity, Gwen. It was a missed opportunity. It should have, at that
Mm.
point, I should have reflected to say, okay, what does this really look like? Where are the opportunities here?
Yeah, absolutely, Toy. And I think just to add on that, so for our listeners, they're saying, well, what would you have done differently? Give us some tips. So I think for me, if I had to go back, and kind of said, and to give our listeners the tips on learnings that I've had, I think I want to summarize it with be humble. And I know sometimes when you think of the word humble, it doesn't mean that you're not being assertive, you're not being confident, not at all. But there's definitely I've had to be humble in the UK because I came in at I kind of left this level, and the UK, my experience, they don't recognize your qualifications and experience. You're new in, you're a baby, and it's kind of like let's see what you've got. You like don't go to that level. So I
Absolutely.
think it's about adjusting expectations that, listeners, if you get in at that level from the beginning, well done, congratulations.
You.
but but it's about saying I might need to take a couple of steps back as a temporary measure. That career wheel, you get the career wheel that does this, and then you get the career wheel that does this. So you might need to go back a little bit, circle around your lower level of experience, and bide your time. I'm sitting here today. I've done my 1 year, right? I've done my 1 year in the absolute operational low level role. It's been tough. I've been humbled, but now I've applied for something else at a higher level. Not quite where I was, but I'm moving, right? I'm moving. So I think for me, it's just around adjusting your expectations and also being clear on, you know, what does your qualification look like in UK terms, in terms of CIPD? And Toyin, I know that you do a lot of podcasts on that, and just encouraging your listeners to those podcasts. But just make sure that you're clear on when you're putting out your CV, what is your actual level of qualification compared to the UK standards. So I think from a career point of view, those were just some of the highlights that I'd like to encourage the listeners, and then just other expectations around, you know, the healthcare system.
Mm,
So in South Africa, if you've got private healthcare, which I was blessed to have, you'd
yep.
pick up the call, you'd see the doctor the next day, maybe a specialist in a month, depending. Here, you have to wait. You have to almost lie that you're dying. This cold that you've got is you're about to get an appointment with the doctor. So it's just, I think, from an expectation point of view, if you are a listener wanting to move, be very clear on the differences of providers, culture, especially within the UK. Talking to the weather, the healthcare system. I mean, my biggest laugh is I think the UK's got the most roundabouts in the whole of the world because
I'm
spent
surprised
so
by
much.
That's just a nightmare.
I've spent so much time going round and round and round and round about. So, I mean, this is kind of the funny side of it,
It
and it
is.
really
It
just
is.
it just grows you as a person.
It does.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a delight, and
It
I
does.
think to listeners, the intention of this is not to put you off.
No.
It's to encourage you to say, guys, it's an exciting chapter. It's an exciting journey, but just what are some of the things that you could maybe look out for that might help you,
Yeah.
in your journey to come over.
Yeah. When something very interesting you said, and I think I want us to delve into it a bit more. When you talked about managing expectations and sort of going back to go forward, I've heard that term in many different ways. Some would say it's a regression to go forward, and it's a lot. I need us to sort of just unpack that for our listeners for a bit. For someone who was at, a CHRO position, and now you have to be really operational. There are two angles I would like us to talk about it, and I would love you to kindly please share with our listeners because I think it's vitally important for them to understand what the ask is. Otherwise, you might get it mixed up. So, are we saying that it is impossible to get a senior HR role coming out of your country, maybe in Africa or any other part of the world, and coming into the UK space? Are we saying it's impossible?
For sure. I mean, I've heard of stories of people, through the networks that I've had, saying that they actually applied for a job in South Africa for a senior role and they got it, and that's great. When I came to the UK, as I was still in the CHRO role, and I was working remotely for a few months, so I then started using that opportunity to look for a job because there's different schools of thought of be in the country first because that's easier, So I decided to do that because I was employed and I didn't want to really, I wanted to focus on that while I was working for Twizzler. So when I came here, it's also this whole thing of applying for jobs. So I applied for the big jobs, I applied for the senior jobs, and then that journey of those regret emails started to come, and week after week I started to lower my expectations to the point where I thought I'm going to be, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I thought I'm going to be sweeping floors in Asda, like that your confidence starts to think like nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I'm going to eat.
Oh,
So, so I kind of then changed my search to say, you know what, I'm not going to look for those big jobs because the UK's been very clear with me in terms of, and I went through recruitment agencies, I went to visit them, I really went out to say, this is me, this is my profile. And they just said, they told me you're going to potentially have to start at the bottom. And I at one point I actually thought I would start as an HR admin, earning kind of 24K a year. And that would have been like the bottom of the barrel. Fortunately, I didn't have to go. I got an HR manager position at GXO. But that again, I'm going back 20 years in my career actually. But again, it was that humility to just, while in the role, was to be, you know what? I'm going to make it work. I'm going to partner. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do the best I can. And I'm going to use the opportunity to coach and mentor my team below me so that I'm going to leave there making, growing them and making it a better place. And I think I've done that. Toyin, I see that we booked 15 minutes. We've got 2 minutes to go. Maybe if we could just extend it and wrap up in 5.
I think
So.
so. I think so. And honestly, Gwen, this is such a huge topic that I feel is just worthy of allowing people here as it is because, again, no one's giving you this side of it. Everyone could be painting to you that picture that you can apply from your home country. You could be headhunted from your home country. We're not saying that's not possible. That's not the message in here, people. The message in
Mm.
here is that that happens and it's probably a top 5%. Now, I use the word top loosely because Gwen and I's qualifications are in no way the bottom. but we're just saying that that happens, but it happens to a few, right? Where does the majority of the people do? Where do they go? What do they get? What then happens for them? Because again, I love the fact that I am in that average. I am in that average with you. I'm not special. Gwen's not special. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I have a really senior HR role, how am I going to come in and start at 24K? I can tell you something, and I'm sure Gwen will echo this. You don't have to start at 24K, but if you have to start at 24K, I hope and pray that by watching this podcast, you have the maturity to understand what the journey is. Now,
Mm.
interestingly, like you, Gwen, I went out as well to speak to recruiters. I probably had maybe about 5 senior level interviews, and we probably just got past the first telephone conversation and then into the first level of the interview. But then the feedback was still the same. I do not have UK HR experience. I mean, you and I are people of integrity. We're not going to fake that. And I do believe that my listeners are not going to fake that as well. So you haven't got it. You haven't understood the UK labor law, the UK employment system, and how labor runs in this country. And that's not to say you're not a top HR person. It just says that there is a gap in your learning. And it's interesting that when we're talking to people about their L&D plans, let's bring this home to us. Because what it simply says is there is a gap in your learning. So how are you going to bridge that gap? Yes, I understand there is the ego bit, and that's something we need to just own. It is absolutely expected. If you have worked at a very senior level in human resources, there's a certain level of conversation that you want to get involved. You're not going to be talking about operational things because you haven't even done that for so long. And that's where Gwen says the humility. And honestly, Gwen, you've got my heart. There is that, there's that, there's that demand for you to take a more humble approach. Not because you're not who you say you are, but the truth about it is that there's a gap in your learning, there's a gap in your skills. And if that gap
Mm.
is to be breached, you're supposed to sort of bridge it intentionally and intelligently. What do I mean by that? So I have met people who are still upset with the system. It's amazing, Gwen. I get into some conversations and I hear bitterness against the system. Now, as a migrant, I understand what you have left because I know what I left. Gwen, you know what you left. But that was back in Africa, that was in South Africa, that was in Nigeria. This is a new playing field, absolutely new level. And if we're being humble, we don't have it. That's it. So if it took
Mm.
1 year, and I love your journey, the fact that you took a step back, you said, you know what, if this is what needs to be done, then let's get to it. There is that bit about people not getting to things quickly that honestly, as a coach, it's understandable because we're different, but it's also very counterproductive. If you know what you need to do, get on with it. Get on with it because the time is gonna go. Here you are, it's a
Mm.
year later. You're in a more senior role. We're not there yet, but we're definitely not where we were. And that's a huge testament to you, to your courage, to your confidence, to your strength as a person to say, this is what needs to get done. And that's what I want anyone who's listening to this to take away from this conversation. You know your situation better than Gwen and I do. What needs to be done?
Absolutely. And I think, Toyin, just to close off from my side, we all know that saying, when in Rome, do as Romans do.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with any country that you go to. When you're there, you have to have the mindset of, I am now in a new country. I have to respect and adopt the laws, the way of working, etc. We don't always like it, for sure, but our attitude is a choice, right? And I mean, I know we're going to talk in one of our podcasts around attitude, mindset, etc. Attitude is a choice, and that's something that you can bring to the table as an HR professional to say, this journey that I'm on, it's not the end, and that's why it's called the journey. And I'm just going to stick with it, and I'm going to keep my chin up. And as I said earlier, you're going to step up, show up, and just hopefully enjoy it. And when you're frustrated, phone a friend. Do what you need to do. You're not alone. So take hope and encouragement. And it's been beautiful seeing you all. I hope you enjoy this. And I know that you'll be reaching out to Toyin if there's anything specific that you want us to talk on. But Toyin, really just thank you to you for being an amazing host, coach, mentor, entrepreneur, just so gutsy. I really just admire and love your strength and tenacity and just your willingness to do this. So thank you.
I feel so much for you as well, Gwen. And I know when we wanted to start this out, it was more around, supporting people with the information that they cannot, I repeat that, they cannot readily find on the internet because most won't share. But we've decided that we will share. I would love to continue this conversation next week. I'm so excited about the conversations we're going to be having, and I do know that a lot of people are going to be blessed by just listening in and getting the right view of what it is to come into the UK and settle in as an HR professional. I mean, guys, there you have it. More than happy to have you join the HR Growth Network. You can find us on LinkedIn under the tab in my name, Olutoyin Williams, and I am more than happy to continue this conversation either in the chat or via email. And just bring those questions, and we would be more than happy to share from our experience how it has been and how we're now getting into that position where we're thriving. We're thriving in our journey. Thank you so much, Gwen, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Toyin. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.